The sun hung low on the horizon like a copper coin suspended in silk, casting long shadows across the dusty landscape as Ibrahim Traoré's convoy wound its way back from the northern border. The three black vehicles moved in careful formation through the undulating terrain, their occupants weary from a day spent navigating the complex realities of governance in a nation still finding its footing. Ibrahim sat in the back seat of the middle vehicle, his weathered hands moving methodically through a stack of handwritten notes. At 52, he carried the weight of leadership in the lines around his eyes and the measured cadence of his speech. His uniform, practical rather than ornate, bore the dust of village squares and the creases of countless hours spent listening to the concerns of his people. "The grain situation in Kosuka is more critical than we thought," he murmured to his aide, Amadou, an earnest young man whose loyalty had been earned through 3 years of witnessing Ibrahim's unconventional approach to leadership. "The rains failed them twice this season, and the backup supplies were delayed by that bridge collapse near Farah." Amadou adjusted his glasses and pulled out his tablet. "The engineers estimate another 2 weeks before the temporary bridge can handle heavy truck traffic, sir. Should we consider helicopter drops?" Ibrahim shook his head slowly. "Too expensive, and it creates dependency. What about the alternate route through Bandiagra? It's longer, but the local chief there has been difficult about passage fees," Amadou said diplomatically. "Ah, yes, Chief Mamadou and his road maintenance contributions." Ibrahim's voice carried a note of irony. "Schedule a meeting with him. Sometimes dignity requires uncomfortable conversations." The convoy had spent the morning in 3 different villages, each presenting its own tapestry of challenges and small victories. In Kosuka, Ibrahim had sat cross-legged in the dust with village elders, sharing mint tea, while discussing the delayed grain shipments. The eldest among them, a woman named Fatimata, whose weathered hands spoke of decades of farming, had looked him directly in the eye and said, "Mr. President, we don't need your pity, we need your partnership." Her words had stayed with him throughout the day. In the second village, Tao, they had inaugurated a new well that had taken 8 months to complete due to bureaucratic delays and 1 case of outright theft of materials. Ibrahim had made a mental note to review the procurement processes again. The joy on the faces of children as clean water flowed for the first time was a reminder of why such struggles mattered. The third stop had been a displaced persons camp where families who had fled drought and conflict were trying to rebuild their lives in temporary shelters that had become permanent through bureaucratic neglect. Ibrahim had walked through the rows of tents in corrugated metal structures, stopping to listen to stories, complaints, and suggestions. He had left with 17 specific action items and a renewed sense of urgency. "Double the grain allocation for both Kosuka and Tao," Ibrahim said now, making a note in his leather-bound journal. "And I want 2 additional nurses with the next convoy. Hunger and disease travel together, and we need to interrupt their journey." "Yes, sir," Amadou replied, fingers flying across his tablet screen. "Dr. Sangare mentioned that the mobile clinic program is showing positive results. Infant mortality in the covered areas has dropped by 12% in 6 months." "Good, but not good enough," Ibrahim said, though his tone carried satisfaction rather than criticism. "What about the maternal health initiative?" 3 new birthing centers are operational, and we've trained 47 traditional midwives in modern techniques. The integration has been smoother than expected." Ibrahim smiled at this. One of his early lessons in leadership had been the importance of building bridges between traditional knowledge and modern practices rather than simply replacing one with the other. "Respect yields cooperation," he murmured, a phrase that had become something of a personal motto. As they entered the outskirts of Ouagadougou, the capital city, the familiar rhythm of urban life began to surround them. Vendors called out their wares in sing-song voices that rose and fell like natural music. Radios crackled with evening news and popular music from doorways and shop fronts. Motorbikes wove through traffic with the fluid grace of dancers, their riders calling greetings to friends and customers. The air carried the mingled scents of wood smoke, frying oil, spices, and the green smell of the mighty Niger River that flowed through the heart of the city. Children played in the spaces between buildings, their laughter adding percussion to the urban symphony. Women balanced impossibly large loads on their heads while conducting animated conversations with neighbors. Men gathered around small tables, moving pieces across hand-carved game boards with the intensity of generals planning campaigns. This was Ibrahim's city, his people, his responsibility. But it was also his inspiration, the source of the energy that sustained him through the difficult days and sleepless nights that came with trying to transform a nation's relationship with power and possibility.
"Sir," his driver, Boubacar, spoke for the first time during the journey. "Traffic is heavy on the main route. Should I take the bypass?" Ibrahim was about to agree when something caught his eye. Under the spreading branches of an ancient neem tree that had witnessed decades of the city's evolution, a young woman sat alone. Even from the distance of a moving vehicle, something about her posture spoke of exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. She was barefoot, her colorful wrapper faded from many washings. Her hands cradled her swollen belly with a protective tenderness that was unmistakable. Beside her on the dusty ground sat a small plastic bowl containing a few coins that caught the last light of the setting sun. "Stop the car," Ibrahim said quietly. Boubacar glanced in the rearview mirror. "Sir, this area isn't... we should really..." "I said stop the car, Boubacar." The convoy slowed to a halt with the precision of a well-rehearsed dance. The security detail, led by Captain Diallo, immediately stepped out to form a protective perimeter. Curious faces began to appear from nearby shops and doorways. Word traveled through the crowd like ripples on water. "Is that him? Is that really the president?" Ibrahim ignored the gathering attention and walked directly toward the woman under the neem tree. Instead of standing above her, which would have created an implicit hierarchy, he lowered himself to sit on the concrete curb so that their eyes were level. The crowd's murmur rose in surprise. "My sister," Ibrahim said gently, using the familial term that transcended social boundaries. "Why do you sit here alone? Are you with child?" The woman's eyes, which had been focused on the ground, lifted to meet his. They were the color of deep earth after rain, and they filled with tears as she nodded. "6 months," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of exhaustion and fear. "I have nothing left to eat, nothing left to sell. I sit here until my legs give out, and then I rest and sit again. People pass me like I'm a shadow on the ground." "What is your name?" Ibrahim asked, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he might use with a frightened child. "Mariam," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Mariam Koulibaly. I didn't come here to shame anyone or to make trouble. I just want this child to live and be strong." Ibrahim glanced at the small bowl with its modest collection of coins, then back at her face. The mathematics of desperation were written there in the hollows beneath her eyes and the careful way she moved to protect her unborn child. "Come with me, Mariam," Ibrahim said. "We'll eat together, and you can tell me your story." But Mariam shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, people will laugh at me. They'll say I used my condition to trick my way into your car. They'll say I'm a beggar who got lucky." Ibrahim's response came without hesitation. "Sister, you bring no shame to anyone. You bring truth, and truth is always welcome at my table. And I'm not taking you to a palace or a grand hall. I'm taking you to a simple room where we can share food and conversation." Mariam searched his face for any sign of deception or mockery. Finding none, she finally nodded. Captain Diallo helped her to her feet and into the vehicle with a gentleness that spoke well of his character. As the convoy prepared to depart, Ibrahim looked back once at the empty space under the neem tree. The indentation in the dust where Mariam had sat seemed to hold an accusation and a challenge. How many others were there, sitting in shadows throughout his city, throughout his country? The dining room Ibrahim chose was far from the grand state chambers where foreign dignitaries were entertained. It was a simple space with whitewashed walls, a sturdy wooden table, and large windows that looked out onto a small garden where jasmine and bougainvillea grew in wild profusion. A steward brought bowls of rice cooked with ginger and bay leaves, vegetables simmered in palm oil, spicy sauce made from tomatoes and hot peppers, and fresh bread still warm from the oven. The aromas filled the room with comfort and promise. Ibrahim dismissed the steward with a gentle wave and took a seat across from Mariam. "Eat, please," he said simply. Mariam hesitated, her hands hovering over the food. "This feels like a dream, and I'm afraid to trust dreams anymore." "This is real," Ibrahim assured her, "and hunger doesn't care about titles or positions. Food is meant to be shared." Slowly Mariam began to eat. As nourishment entered her body, color returned to her cheeks, and her shoulders gradually relaxed. Ibrahim ate as well, but his attention remained focused on his guest. "Tell me about yourself, Mariam," he said softly. "How did you come to be sitting under that tree?" Mariam's hand stilled for a moment as she gathered her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice carried the cadence of someone who had rehearsed her story in her own mind many times, trying to make sense of the events that had led her to this moment.
"When I first discovered I was pregnant," she began, "my husband Yakuba laughed so loud that the neighbors thought we had won the lottery. He was working as a truck loader at the depot, and the pay wasn't much, but it was steady. He would come home each evening covered in dust and sweat, but always smiling." Her own smile flickered to life at the memory. "He would put his hands on my belly and talk to the baby. If you're a boy," he would say, "I'll teach you to ride a bicycle the day you can stand." I would tease him. "And if it's a girl?" His answer never changed. "Then I'll buy her 2 bicycles so she can race with her friends." The smile cracked, and grief flooded back into her features. One morning he left earlier than usual. The regular route was blocked by a broken-down truck, so the drivers had to take the mountain road. It's narrow and dangerous, especially in the rainy season. She paused to take a sip of water, her hand trembling slightly. There was an accident. A truck lost its brakes on the steep section. Yakuba's vehicle. It went over the edge. The room fell silent except for the distant sounds of the city and the whisper of wind through the garden outside. Mariam continued. "They brought him to the hospital, but he was badly hurt. The nurse said they needed money for emergency surgery, for blood, for x-rays. We didn't have enough. I ran through the neighborhood borrowing from anyone who would help. My neighbors gave what they could, but it wasn't enough." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "When I returned with the money, the nurse looked at me with such sad eyes. 'I'm sorry,' she said. 'We waited as long as we could. Yakuba had died while I was running from house to house, begging for coins to save his life.'" Ibrahim felt the familiar anger rise in his chest, not at Mariam, but at a system that could demand payment from a desperate woman while her husband's life hung in the balance. He had been working to change such policies, but change moved slowly through bureaucratic channels while people suffered in real time. "After Yakuba died," Mariam continued, "everything began to fall apart. His small salary had been enough to pay rent and buy food, but without it, the landlord came every week demanding payment. My friends wanted to help, but they had their own families to feed. Some offered me space on their floors, but with a baby coming," she touched her belly protectively, I tried to find work, but who wants to hire a pregnant woman with no skills except keeping house? I tried to sell things, but I had nothing valuable to sell. Finally, I had no choice but to sit on that corner and hope for kindness. "How long have you been on the street?" Ibrahim asked gently. 3 weeks, Mariam replied. "Every day except Friday from morning till evening. People give what they can, but it's barely enough for one meal. Some days, nothing at all." Ibrahim leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Mariam, I want you to understand something. What happened to your husband, what happened at that hospital, the situation that forced you onto the street, none of this is your fault. These are failures of systems, failures of leadership, failures of community. You have done nothing wrong." Mariam covered her face with her hands, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Ibrahim waited patiently, understanding that sometimes healing required tears. When she finally looked up, he continued, "I also want you to know that you will not return to that corner. That is not a promise for the cameras or for politics. That is my word to you as one human being to another." "People make promises when others are watching," Mariam said quietly, "but when the cameras turn off—" "The only camera here today," Ibrahim said, touching his chest over his heart, "is my memory, and it never stops recording." He called for tea, and as they waited for it to arrive, he asked, "If you could choose any kind of work, what would make you feel most fulfilled?" Mariam blinked in surprise. "Work? You mean a real job?" "Yes, exactly that. What would you choose if you could choose anything?" A shy light entered her eyes. "Since I was a little girl, I have loved flowers. Our neighbor, Mama Awa, had a small garden behind her house. She taught me their names: hibiscus, bougainvillea, jasmine, marigold, roses. I learned to arrange them for weddings and naming ceremonies. I always dreamed of having my own flower shop, but dreams like that—" She shrugged. "Dreams are expensive things for poor people." "Dreams should never be luxuries," Ibrahim said firmly. "They should be rights." That night, while Mariam slept in a guest room that had been prepared for her, Ibrahim stood by his office window, looking out at the city lights that twinkled like earthbound stars. The weight of the day's encounters pressed upon him, but it was a productive weight, the kind that demanded action rather than despair. He picked up his phone and called his chief of staff, Aminata Diarra, a woman whose intelligence and integrity had made her indispensable to his administration. "Aminata, I need you to help me with something," he said without preamble. "Of course, Mr. President. What do you need?" "Find me a small commercial space near the central market, something affordable but visible, and reach out to Mama Rukia, the florist who works near the Grand Mosque. Ask if she would be willing to train someone in the flower business for a month."
There was a brief pause. "May I ask what this is for?" "We're about to start something new," Ibrahim said, "and I also need you to arrange for Dr. Salif to make weekly house calls to a pregnant woman. Full prenatal care, no fees." "Sir, there will be talk about this. People will say—" "Let them talk," Ibrahim interrupted. "I'm not doing this for headlines or approval ratings. I'm doing this because it's right." The next morning brought a flurry of activity. While Mariam rested and recovered from weeks of inadequate nutrition, Ibrahim's team worked to transform his impulsive act of kindness into something more systematic and sustainable. By the end of the week, a narrow shop on a busy street had been transformed. The walls wore a fresh coat of white paint that seemed to glow in the morning light. A skilled carpenter had built sturdy shelves and a practical counter. The signwriter had painted the words with careful precision: "Miriam's Garden, Flowers and Hope." When Mariam first saw the shop, she stood in the doorway with her hands covering her cheeks, tears streaming down her face. "This can't be real," she whispered. Mama Rakia, the elderly florist from the mosque, arrived carrying buckets of fresh flowers and wearing a mischievous smile. "So you're the one who's going to steal all my customers," she teased, pinching Miriam's arm affectionately. "Good! This city needs more color and beauty." Ibrahim arrived quietly, without his usual convoy, dressed in simple civilian clothes. He became the shop's first customer, purchasing a mixed bouquet of roses, chrysanthemums, and mint leaves. "Every business begins with its first sale," he said, placing money in the small tin box that would serve as a cash register. A small boy who had been staring at him in wonder giggled when Ibrahim winked at him. The basic structure was simple but thoughtful: a small grant to cover the first 3 months of rent and initial stock, Dr. Salif's commitment to weekly prenatal visits, and a handwritten sign on the back wall that read, "We sell flowers, not dignity, no bribes, no debt with shame." The first few days of operation passed like a gentle dream. Women bought garlands for weddings and naming ceremonies. A teacher purchased small potted plants for her classroom. A taxi driver grinned as he bought a single rose, explaining, "My wife thinks I have no romance left in me. This should surprise her." Children would pause on their way to school to watch Miriam arrange bouquets, and she would tell them the names of different flowers and what they symbolized. Elderly women would stop to offer advice about business and pregnancy with equal enthusiasm. But the peace was fragile, and trouble announced itself on a Tuesday morning when a man in a leather jacket leaned against the counter with casual menace. "Nice little shop you've got here," he said, his eyes taking inventory of everything valuable. "This street has certain rules. Everyone pays a safety fee to make sure nothing unfortunate happens." Miriam's throat grew dry, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "I pay my taxes like everyone else. I don't understand what other fees you mean." The man's smile was cold. "Taxes go to the government. This fee comes to us. For protection. You understand protection, don't you? A pregnant woman, alone, in a shop full of fragile things." Before Miriam could respond, Mama Rakia stepped out from behind a display of potted plants, her eyes blazing with indignation. "She pays her legal taxes and follows the law," the older woman said firmly. "She doesn't need your kind of protection." The man's expression darkened. "Old woman, you should mind your own business." "This is my business," Rakia replied, moving to stand beside Miriam. "This girl is under my protection now. Find somewhere else to practice your extortion." The man tapped the counter once with his knuckles, a sound that carried implicit threat. "We'll see about that," he said, and walked away. Within hours, the harassment began in earnest. The electricity to the shop was mysteriously cut, causing the flowers in the refrigerated display to begin wilting. Rumors appeared on social media. "Palace pet given free shop while families starve." An opposition blogger mocked the initiative as a pity performance designed to distract from real policy failures. A clerk from the municipal office arrived to announce that Miriam's permit was missing a crucial stamp, a stamp that would now cost 5 times the usual fee due to recent administrative changes. That evening, Miriam sat in the back room of her shop crying quietly, while Mama Rakia held her hands. "Maybe I should just close," she whispered. "I don't want to cause trouble for anyone." "Child," she said firmly, "you've worked harder in 1 week than some people work in a year. Trouble found you when you were sitting under that tree with nothing. You didn't give up then. Don't give up now when you have something to fight for." Dr. Salif arrived for his weekly visit to find Mariam trying to compose herself behind a crate of wilted flowers. He listened to the baby's heartbeat, checked her blood pressure, and nodded with satisfaction. "The baby is strong and healthy," he announced, "but your blood pressure is elevated. You need to drink more water, rest when you can, and when trouble comes knocking, call this number." He pressed a card into her hand. On it was written a direct phone line and the words, "For when the system fails you." That evening, Ibrahim arrived at the shop wearing plain clothes and a baseball cap. He bought a small succulent plant and asked casually, "How has your day been?" Mariam told him everything: the man in the leather jacket, the power cut, the social media attacks, the permit problems. She braced herself for anger or disappointment. Ibrahim was indeed angry, but his anger was controlled, purposeful. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "several things will happen. First, we will file a police report about the extortion attempt. Second, we will launch a pilot program for small business protection. If a legitimate shop faces illegal fees or harassment, we provide free legal assistance. If permits get lost or delayed, we expedite them. If rumors spread, we counter them with facts." He looked directly into her eyes. "This is not charity, Mariam. This is government working as it should work." "And if people laugh at us?" she asked. "Then let them laugh," Ibrahim replied with tired but determined eyes. "We'll be too busy selling flowers to pay attention." The next morning, someone had spray-painted "Palace Girl" across the shop's metal shutter, an insult suggesting that Mariam had only succeeded through presidential favoritism and didn't deserve her opportunity. But by noon, 3 women from the neighborhood stood guard in front of the shop with their arms crossed, daring anyone to add more graffiti. By evening, a young university student had posted a video online. "I bought a plant today from this flower shop. The owner used to sit in the sun, begging for coins to feed herself and her unborn child. Now she pays taxes, employs her cousin part-time, and adds beauty to our neighborhood. This is the kind of politics I want to see more of." The video was shared hundreds of times within hours, and the man in the leather jacket never returned. 3 months later, Ibrahim convened a meeting of his cabinet ministers and regional governors. Instead of taking his usual seat at the head of the polished conference table, he stood beside a large map of the country that had been pinned to the wall, his sleeves rolled up, a marker in his hand. "I want you to help me find every corner where people are forced to stand with empty bowls, not for photo opportunities or political theater. Find them so we can offer real solutions." What emerged from that meeting became known as the Dignity Initiative, a comprehensive program built on 4 foundational pillars. First, systemic identification of need. Teams of volunteers, healthcare workers, and community leaders would conduct regular surveys throughout the country, documenting families at risk, widows, single mothers, orphaned children, disabled workers, and others who had fallen through the cracks of existing social services. A simple phone code, 151#, would allow anyone to report cases directly to government response teams. Second, tools, not charity. Rather than creating dependency through handouts, the program would provide people with the means to rebuild their lives. Small business grants coupled with training, equipment for craftspeople, materials for farmers, and mentorship for entrepreneurs. The goal was sustainable self-sufficiency, not temporary relief. Third, universal healthcare access. Free maternal and child health care, regular mobile clinic visits to remote areas, clearly posted fee schedules in all public hospitals to prevent exploitation, integrity desks for reporting corruption, and a confidential hotline for those too frightened to complain in person. Fourth, radical transparency. Every Friday, detailed financial reports would be broadcast to the nation. Money received, money spent, projects completed, babies born safely, and yes, failures and setbacks as well. Accountability would not be a promise for the future, but a practice in the present. 2 weeks before her due date, at midnight, Mariam's labor began. The contractions started slowly, like distant thunder, then intensified with frightening speed. She called Dr. Salif's emergency number, and he immediately dispatched an ambulance. But the vehicle became trapped at a construction site where road repairs had reduced traffic to a single lane. Ibrahim was in a late-night budget meeting when his phone buzzed with the news. Without hesitation, he stood up. "Gentlemen, we'll continue this tomorrow. I have somewhere I need to be." His convoy cut through the empty streets with urgency, but not recklessness, arriving at the flower shop just as neighbors were pounding on the metal shutter. Inside, Mariam leaned against her counter, breathing heavily, her hair damp with perspiration. "It hurts," she gasped, then managed a weak laugh. "I know that's completely obvious, but it still feels worth saying." "It is worth saying," Ibrahim assured her, "and you won't face this alone." When the ambulance finally arrived, the paramedic who stepped out was a woman Mariam recognized with a shock of painful memory. It was the same nurse who had demanded payment the night Yakuba died. The nurse froze when she saw Mariam. I remember you," she whispered. "You told us to bring money while my husband was dying," Mariam said, pain mixing with old anger. Tears filled the nurse's eyes. "I know. I told myself the system forced me to do it. Maybe it did, but I hid behind that excuse. Let me be different tonight. Let me help you now." Mariam looked at Ibrahim, who nodded encouragingly. "People can change," he said simply. The journey to the hospital was swift, sirens wailing through the empty streets. The maternity ward smelled of antiseptic and hope, bright fluorescent lights flooding the corridors as nurses rushed to prepare for the delivery. Labor was long and exhausting. At one critical point, the baby's heartbeat began to slow dangerously. Dr. Salif entered the room with calm authority. "Look at me, Mariam," he said steadily. "Breathe slowly, just like we practiced. Good. Again." At 3:17 in the morning, a strong cry pierced the silence. A baby boy emerged into the world, small but fierce, angry at the cold and bright lights, but undeniably alive and healthy. They placed him on Mariam's chest, and she laughed and cried simultaneously. "Yakuba," she whispered to the ceiling, "you said to keep the dream alive. Look, it opened its eyes." Ibrahim stood in the doorway, his hand over his heart. The nurse who had helped with the delivery wept openly. "Thank you," Mariam told her. "Tonight you were the person I needed you to be. Stay that person." The nurse nodded, unable to speak. When dawn light began to filter through the hospital windows, Ibrahim brought dates and fresh milk. He asked, "What will you name him?" Mariam smiled through her exhaustion. "He'll carry his father's name, Yakuba, so the world remembers what we lost. And he'll carry your gift too, Nasir, which means helper, so he remembers what kindness looks like." Ibrahim laughed softly. "Then welcome to the world, Yakuba Nasir. May your life be longer than our complaints, and your heart quicker than our excuses." 6 months later, Mariam's flower shop had become more than a business. It had become a symbol. The walls were lined with photos of other Dignity Initiative success stories: a widow who had opened a tailoring shop, a disabled veteran who repaired bicycles, a group of young mothers who had started a communal garden. Children would stop by after school to learn about different types of flowers and what they meant in various ceremonies. Mariam had begun teaching flower arrangement classes in the evenings, passing on the skills Mama Rukia had taught her. The shop's back wall now displayed a framed page from a notebook that had been found in Yakuba's locker at the truck depot. In his careful handwriting were detailed drawings of a flower shop, shelves, buckets, a counter, and a sign. At the bottom, he had written, "If I don't get to build this with her, help her build it without me." When Ibrahim visited now, which he did regularly and without fanfare, he would buy a single flower and tuck it into his shirt pocket. Baby Yakuba,
growing round and healthy, would clap his hands in approval from the basket behind the counter. "He's going to be a politician," Mariam would tease. "He already knows how to work a crowd." "God help us all," Ibrahim would reply with mock horror, making the baby giggle. The Dignity Initiative had expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations. By the end of the first year, it had helped establish over 200 small businesses, provided health care to 15,000 pregnant women and new mothers, and created a network of integrity monitors in every major public institution. More importantly, it had begun to change the relationship between government and citizens. The weekly transparency reports had become appointment television, with citizens calling in to ask questions, report problems, and suggest improvements. Corruption hadn't been eliminated, but it had been forced into retreat. On the first anniversary of their meeting, Ibrahim and Mariam returned to the neem tree where their story had begun. The spot looked different now. Nailed to the massive trunk was a blue sign that read, "If you need work or help, dial 151. If you can offer work or help, dial 151. Beneath the sign sat a simple plastic chair, just enough for someone to sit while making that crucial phone call.
"Small things," Ibrahim said, touching the sign, "but they open big doors." Mariam, holding baby Yakuba, who was now walking and getting into everything, smiled. "The tree remembers," she said, "and so will he." A woman approached hesitantly, clearly in need, clearly nervous. Without being asked, Mariam handed her the phone number and guided her to the chair. "Take your time," she said gently. "Help is real." As they walked back to their respective vehicles, Ibrahim reflected on the lessons of the past year. True leadership, he had learned, was not about grand gestures or sweeping policies, though those had their place. It was about stopping for people everyone else walked past. It was about treating dignity as a right, not a gift to be bestowed upon the deserving. The flower shop continued to thrive, now employing 3 people and serving as a training center for other aspiring florists. The Dignity Initiative had become permanent law, with dedicated funding and institutional support that would outlast any single administration. But perhaps most importantly, the city had learned a new habit. When someone stood alone in need, fewer people looked away. More pulled up chairs, dialed numbers, and stayed until help arrived. Under the neem tree that had once shaded sorrow, the blue sign now pointed toward dignity, and in a flower shop nearby, a young mother arranged bouquets while her son played among the blossoms, both of them living proof that change begins with the simple act of caring enough to stop. The future remained uncertain, as futures always do, but it was a future where dignity was no longer a luxury item, where hope had an address, and where the most powerful question anyone could ask was not, "What's in it for me?" but, "How can I help?" And in that future, under spreading trees and in simple shops, the revolution of kindness continued, one flower, one hand, one open door at a time.